What is up, everybody? Happy Friday. Welcome into the Pack-A-Day Podcast Happy Hour. I am your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Thanks as always for being here. Obviously, a lot of stuff to discuss. We've had some defensive coordinator interview confirmations. Obviously, everyone has their favorites in the clubhouse already of who they want Green Bay to hire at the position. Green Bay brings in a kicker this week. They let go of their training staff. Of course, Joe Barry is gone. Joe Barry, by the way, interviewing for the defensive coordinator position of the Chicago Bears. How amazing is that? And yeah, obviously it was like less than a week ago that the Packers lost to the 49ers. So it has been a crazy whirlwind of a week already. I'm sure a lot of the questions are going to have to do with the defensive coordinator and things like that. So we'll jump into it right away. Per usual, probably be here about 45 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. We'll obviously go through any super chats will get answered. We'll go through that first. So if you want to send through a super chat or a sticker, obviously we'll prioritize those. Pack-A-Day Podcast members, I'm going to try to get to as many questions of those, but we'll see as much as we can get to through the course of this. But I'm super excited. And again, hope you guys are enjoying your Friday. Ron, interesting question to start things off. How do you measure a defense? It seems fairly subjective to me. Stats don't tell the full story. I mean, yes, like there's a variety of ways in which you can measure defensive performance and success. And you can go as simplified as points allowed per game, but you have to be even more cognizant of that, because if you are running a bend but don't break and you allow only 21 points per game, but those 3 drives took 8-9 minutes off the clock and it just bled the clock and there weren't a ton of drives in the game, that might not look so great. You certainly need to look at turnovers and your ability to create and force turnovers. Turnovers are one of the biggest indicators of success in any given season and game. And you do have to find a way to take the ball away via forced fumble, via interception. But within that, you can have real legitimate forced turnovers and you can have, just fluke plays that go within that as well. I think obviously your DVOA for defense and just like your net yards allowed and how you're allowing it, 3 and outs, there's a variety of different ways that you can measure it. And there's in my opinion, one perfect system that vets all of it. Where I go back to Joe Barry and how I sort of evaluate him through 3 seasons is there's nothing to me that you could point to that was going great. Run defense, not great. Pass defense, not great. Turnovers, not great. Sacks, not great. Like there was nothing that DVOA, certainly not great. If there's nothing, it's not going well. If there's nuance, all right, we can have a conversation. If you are one of the worst teams in the league at allowing points, but you're the best team in the league at forcing turnovers, all right, we can have a conversation. You are an aggressive defense that's ball hawking and you're going to give up some big plays, but you're going to get your big plays too. That might be worth it. If you are more of a bend but don't break, all right, that can be fine, but you better be on the lower spectrum of points allowed per game because you're probably giving up some big drives in the process of doing that, and that could affect your offense and special teams. So again, there's no one perfect way. You have to look at the total picture. Some of it is eye test. Some of it is, how does this team play in big situations? Red zone, 3rd down, 4th down, and again, enforcing turnovers. Those are all things that you need to look at, but I don't think there's any one perfect specific way. It just depends on how your defense is set up to play and are they executing on how they're supposed to play. With Green Bay's defense, I never felt like they were executing the bend but don't break defense that they wanted to play. And it just didn't go well. There was nothing that you could point to that they did great. And to me, that's why it was ultimately a failure. But some stats are subjective, some are not, but you just have to use every single piece of the puzzle to try to put together as much of the picture as possible and then make your determination based off of that. Parker, are you concerned with whoever is chosen as defensive coordinator that they won't get to hire his own staff, as that has been the case in the past under Matt LaFleur? I'm not yet. I think a lot depends on this as well. And this is where like all of these conversations are so nuanced and we get into the Twitter world of like, so-and-so is not a qualified defensive coordinator. They suck. And it's like, well, we need to have some nuance here. I'm not saying this is you, obviously, Parker, and this is a different conversation. What I would like to see is Matt get his guy and then have logical conversations as to who is on staff already. And you might bring in somebody, like if you bring in a Christian Parker, right? Christian Parker's like, 32 years old. Christian Parker may not have quite the wherewithal yet and the connections to put together his whole entire staff. He might not have a defensive line coach, like outside linebackers coach, inside linebackers coach, corners coach, passing game coordinator, and safety in his Rolodex to go through of like, hey, here's all the guys that I want to bring in to run my system. He was here in Green Bay when just a handful of years ago, he worked directly with some of these individuals that are on the staff already. He might come in and say, man, I would love to work with Kirk Olivedati and Jerry Montgomery and Ryan Downard. I worked with those guys before, and I would love to work with them again. He might say, hey, there's two specific coaches that I need to have on this staff to make what I do successful, in which case you really want to try and go out and get those coaches, regardless of the capacity that they work in. So in one hand, if you have a coach like that, you might need to help them out, and some of the assistants that you already have on staff may make total sense. If you bring in a Wink Martindale and Wink Martindale says, listen, I need all of my own staff. If you are hiring me as defensive coordinator, you are hiring me as CEO, czar, dictator of all things defense. And if you are giving me that job, I need full autonomy to run this thing. I know you, Matt LaFleur, want to handle the offense and the day-to-day, and you need to have oversight on everything. And the reason that you're hiring me for this job is because you want me to take over the defense. If that's the reason, then I need my people and my guys, and you need to let me, the ability to do that. And if Matt says, nope, I'm not okay with that, it's just not going to be a match that works. If he wants somebody like that, then he's going to have to bend a little and say, hey, if you want some of the staff that are already here, you can. If not, you have the ability to go out and sign your own guys. So I think it's very situation dependent. And I think there's some really smart, great coaches that are on this staff right now, but you also don't want to set up any regime for failure. We saw, I don't know this to be a fact. I believe it to be true just based on some of the stuff we saw in the parting of ways last season. It felt to me that Joe Barry and Jerry Gray were never on the same page with how they wanted the secondary run a couple of years ago. And it just felt like there was a huge disconnect there. And those are the sort of things that you want to avoid. If you're bringing in someone to run the defense, well, then they need to be able to run their specific system. And if there's not anyone, whether it's a player or a coach, that's not getting in line with that and wants to do things their own way, they're not going to be a fit. And you better move on from that sooner rather than later and let the coach just get his guys to start off with. So I'll say it one more time. I think it's very situation dependent. I think it's dependent upon who they decide to hire in that defensive coordinator role. I would say somebody that's younger, less experienced, not as much of a concern for me. If you're bringing in somebody that you're giving the full autonomy to, and you're saying you're going to be the CEO of the defense, then I would prefer they allow them to go out and get the guys that they want. That's also not to say, like, guys, the coaching circle is like this, and whether we want to call it whatever you want to call it, we'll just leave that conversation to the side for today. But regardless, like the coaching circle, so many of these guys have crossed paths or know a person through a person or have met together at coaching dinners and banquets or have spoken at events together. Like the circle is so small. All these guys might be totally fine working with each other. So to us on the outside, it might be like, oh, like they wouldn't get rid of Jerry Montgomery for the new defensive coordinator, when really the defensive coordinator is like, man, I would be stupid not to keep Jerry Montgomery. It's all very situation dependent. And I think it's hard for us to know exactly what goes into that. Donald Cunningham, if the objective is a coach who doesn't need any help and just needs to be left alone, why would a young first-time defensive coordinator even be considered? First of all, I don't necessarily know that that's the ultimate objective. We don't know for sure that Matt wants somebody that is just going to go and do his own thing and be like completely hands off. Matt might want to stay engaged and involved in that situation. And I keep bringing this up and I'm so sorry for doing it, but you don't want a situation where you bring in a new head coach in Adrian Griffin in the Bucs, and they bring in an experienced assistant in Terry Stotts, and Griffin thinks he's going to have full say and be able to be part of those conversations. And Stotts is like, whoa, what the hell are you doing? I'm here to run the defense. Let me run the defense. And all of a sudden there's a bashing of heads. If Matt wants some, form of still control and autonomy over that room, somebody like a Wink Martindale may not make any sense. And we just don't know what Matt's looking for. If Matt does want this person to be the CEO and everyone of that position, then, you probably do want to go a little bit more experienced, and you probably do, want somebody that's had, defensive play calling experience and defensive coordinator and done everything. And then you kind of want to just get out of their way. My guess is it's probably somewhere in the middle, but you're not necessarily looking, if you're Matt LaFleur, of you need this one specific thing. You want to make this hire with the right person for the right reasons, meaning, are they going to be adaptable to the players that you have on the team? Are they going to be, bring a level of energy and enthusiasm to this defense? Do they have a plan in place that they can go out and execute? And if that's somebody that's 32 or if that's somebody who's 70, I personally do not care. And there's a lot of times where these guys need an opportunity, whether, some of these awesome offensive and defensive minds in the NFL right now are 32, 33, 35, 38. They're in their 30s. Other ones are in their 60s and 70s. There's no perfect calculus here for if we do this exactly right, we're going to get this amazing defensive coordinator. You have to have those conversations. You have to be in the interview. You have to know if it's going to fit with the overall structure of your team. Does their coaching philosophy and personality fit with Matt's, personality and coaching philosophy? All those things have to mesh super, super well. So I don't know, again, what Matt specifically wants. Maybe he does want some say still in that defensive room. Maybe he doesn't want any at all. And that's probably going to gauge his level of interest in some of these candidates. But based on the first 4 candidates that we have seen, it seems like he's okay with, either one, giving the full autonomy to someone younger and saying, hey, I don't care what age you are and what experience you are. This is your job now. I have faith in you to go run it. Or that he still has his thumb and imprint on some of what's going on the defense. And I don't have a firm take one way or the other on what's the best way to do it. And we'll talk about that more, I'm sure, as this conversation goes on. But that's why, just getting the guy in the interview and talking to him and going through things and figuring out their philosophy and how they're going to run the team is so important. And then from there, you decide if they're the right hire. And if they are, then you set them up for success from day one. And maybe Matt starts with, if it's a Christian Parker, and he's just the youngest, so it's kind of the easiest one to talk about in that sort of way. If it is a Christian Parker, maybe you set up a plan. Hey, to begin this, first season, in training camp, OTAs, mini camps, I'm going to have to be heavily involved. I'm going to probably have to pop in there for the first 6-8 weeks of the season. By the third quarter of the season, I'm going to start getting a little bit more hands off. And my goal is by the last quarter of the season and hopefully playoffs, I don't need to be involved anymore. There can be a process to that too, but you want to get them off to a strong start. And it just depends on what direction, that Matt wants to go in. Parker, is Christian Parker the guy that you like the most out of those who have been reported to have an interview so far? Here's the conversation. Sorry, I got something in my eye really quick here, guys. Here's a conversation that I want to have on this. I really liked the thought and idea of Christian Parker. He probably is my favorite of the group of 4 so far. But let's dig into what that means. I've never talked to Christian Parker. He's been a defensive backs coach in Denver. He was a assistant for Green Bay. Matt LaFleur brought him into Green Bay. I like the fact that he's dealt with the Packers in the past. I know that he's worked under Mike Pettin. He's worked under Vance Joseph. He's worked under, Ejiro Evero. He's worked under a lot of different defensive philosophies, and I think he's going to be able to blend some of that together. How anyone, myself included, am supposed to know if that is going to qualify him to call plays, to put together a defense, to build a scheme, to get a defense that's been established, to buy in to that specific philosophy, to bring an energy and an enthusiasm, to make the right call in the right moment, to know when to bring pressure, to be malleable and utilize your system to the players that you have on the roster, to know how to, basically play chess with opposing offensive coordinators and know if I do this, then I do this. Those are near impossible things for any of us to know. And it goes for almost every single one of these defensive coordinators. With a guy like Wink Martindale or Brandon Staley, we can see a little bit more and go back to when they were coordinators and what statistical, DVOA and points allowed per game and turnovers and those sort of things that they had. We can go back and watch film of some of those defenses. For somebody like a Christian Parker, it's really, or anyone that's like in a similar situation, I don't know how you go about gleaning exactly if they would make a great defensive coordinator or not. And this is kind of like the crux of my overall thought on this process and where it's been kind of like a huge week. I've seen people like, oh, Jim Leonard would make a terrible defensive coordinator. Based on what? He had great defenses at Wisconsin. He was literally the guy they wanted to hire in Green Bay. He was one of the finalists, if not going to be the guy in Philadelphia for their defensive coordinator position just last year. But he decided that he needed surgery, was going to stay at home, was going to, kind of do a little work for Illinois in a senior analyst role, but get his surgery done and not do a full coaching job last year. He got the job in Green Bay, was either a finalist or one of the, people that they may have actually gone with for the defensive coordinator for the Eagles coming off a Super Bowl appearance. They thought enough of him that they were going to hire him to lead that defense moving forward, or at least very highly considered it. But because he was from Wisconsin or because of some other reason or because he, has Mike Pettin connections, it's no longer a good hire. We don't know what he's been doing for the past 2 years. He may have been putting together and analyzing defenses and evolving his coaching philosophy and evolving his defense. And he might just be a perfect guy for the job. Same thing with Christian Parker. Maybe Brandon Staley sucked as a head coach, but was one of the great defensive coordinators. I can say this about Brandon Staley. There's nobody else that Green Bay is going to interview that has ever put together a season of having the single best defense in the NFL. Now, there is nuance there. He had 2 generational players in Aaron Donald and in Jalen Ramsey, who were at the peak of their powers when he was there, when they had the number 1 defense. But look at the rest of that defense. Wasn't very good. Leonard Floyd's like the 3rd best player on that defense, and he was like fine. Like there's not much there. So it's great that he had 2 generational players, but the rest of that defense wasn't super great. And that is more where I'm at here of like, there are different personalities, schemes, whatever, ages. Like if you want somebody young and exuberant and maybe less experienced, fine. If you want somebody that's older and experienced, that's fine. Every single one of these coordinator hires, if we want to pick through it and prod at it, we can say, oh, he's never had NFL experience. Oh, he's never had defensive coordinator experience. Oh, he's been a defensive coordinator, but 2 of his 3 seasons, his DVOA was in the 20s. Oh, he had 1 year as an amazing defensive coordinator, best in the league, but his last 3 years as a coach were absolutely abysmal on the defensive side. There is holes that we can poke in every one of your favorite candidates. What I would urge you all to do is to also look at the strengths, because I do believe Brandon Staley, not necessarily my guy. Not if I had to choose, Brandon Staley's probably not on the top 5 guys, maybe even the top 10 on my list of potential candidates. Do I think he has a lot of potential strengths if they go in that direction? Yeah, I do. I think there's a lot of things that he could potentially bring to the table. Do I think he would be an upgrade from Joe Barry? Yes. Do I think he's going to run the same Joe Barry, Vic Fangio system? No, he's going to have his own wrinkles and nuances to what he brings to that. And I think he's going to evolve going into another defensive coordinator role rather than a head coaching job. So while it's not the person that I would go with, it's really hard to tell when there's only such like limited information that we have, and we can't glean again without being in the interview room and knowing what these guys want to bring to the table. I think whether it's Brandon Staley or Jim Leonard or Christian Parker, I all think they're going to have these really unique strengths. It's ultimately up to Matt LaFleur to pick which one of those guys is going to be best for the room. It is going to be extremely, extremely hard for me to have like any of these hires and be like, oh my God, that would be such an awful, just terrible hire. Because I do think all of these guys have their unique strengths and weaknesses. So yeah, Christian Parker, on the research that I've done and what other coaches around him say, every belief is that he's going to be not only a defensive coordinator, but an NFL head coach someday. That's how highly people think of him. And I think that the fact that he's been in multiple systems, the fact that he's been with the Packers in the past, that Matt LaFleur was the guy who brought him into the NFL, like I think there's a lot of synergy there that makes a ton of sense. You could get him in a room and he might not be able to put together a coherent playbook or a philosophy. And he might Matt LaFleur might exit that interview being like, oh my God, this guy's like 15 years away from being a defensive coordinator. He might walk out of that interview being like, oh my God, that's the brightest defensive mind I've ever talked to. And we need to get him in here right freaking now. I have no idea. But on the surface, yes, Christian Parker, I like a lot. I didn't mean for that to be like luxury. It's just like everyone's been like, so like, this guy's great, this guy's terrible. And it's really, really difficult. Even if you want to dig into all of it to say like, there's good and there's bad, there's in between and almost all of it. But I really, truly, guys, when it was like Evero and Joe Barry is like the finalist last time, I did like Leonard last time. I thought he was the guy to go with. They tried to go with him. They offered it and he declined, and so be it. But when it came down to Evero and Barry at the time, it did feel like, and even like through that interview process, even though I did like Leonard, it felt like their final candidates was like a very, very shallow pool. It felt very like, I'm not so sure about this. This time, I think there are tremendous candidates out there, and I'm really, really excited. And I do really feel like the upgrade is going to be significant, regardless of like even any of the guys that have been rumored interviews. Chris Harris is another one that there's been reports that the Packers have interest in, and there hasn't been a confirmed interview, at least that I've seen yet. But any of these guys, I think, are going to be pretty solid upgrades. And I'm really, really excited to see how Matt LaFleur goes throughout this process and ultimately which coach he ultimately lands on. All right. Let's see. Preston, what would a fourth quarter game in the line playoff situation defense look like with the goated trio of Barry, Pettin, and Capers as co-defensive coordinators? Oh boy. Well, Mike Pettin would want to bring some crazy blitz pressure out of nowhere. Barry would have all of his defensive backs playing way off. And I think Dom Capers would be the tiebreaker and more go with a blitz heavy approach. We'd probably see some form of a 3-4 defense. I think Mike Pettin and Dom Capers probably just went out and say, screw you, Joe Barry, we're going to bring pressure. So I think it ends up being like a 7-man pressure with 4 in on defense. And they're just going to say, we're going to live and die by the blitz. And in ultimate Packers fashion, they give up a touchdown, a 2-point conversion, an onside kick, and another touchdown just for good measure is probably what happens in that situation, Preston. All right, Brett, does Kenny Clark get that third contract in Green Bay? That's a difficult question to answer simply because there's a good chance with Kenny that they just kind of keep doing restructures for a while, similar to kind of what like Aaron Jones has been doing, where like instead of just doing, oh, his contract's up, let's give him a huge new deal. And then his contract's up, let's give him another deal. I think it might just be like every single offseason for the next 2 or 3 years. They're like, yep, we want you back. Let's redo your contract. Oh, yep, we want you back. Let's redo your contract. Oh, we don't want you back. See you later. So I don't necessarily think it's going to be this like one really big deal. I think you might just get to the point of year to year with Kenny very similarly to what we've seen out of Aaron Jones so far. All right. Rick, if you are Staley, don't you want to return to the Rams? I would think that that would be a really realistic and obvious situation. He's coached Aaron Donald. He's coached with Sean McVay. It seems like that would be a very smart and obvious fit. But I know the Dolphins are very interested. I know Rob Domofsky initially reported that Brandon Staley was not in. I think it was Rob. Don't quote me on that. But I think he reported that Brandon Staley was not in Green Bay's initial group of candidates. But I definitely don't think that it hurts to interview him just to bring him in and see what he has to say. But yeah, I do think that the Rams would make a ton of sense for Brandon Staley. I will tell you, Salty Jordy, exactly to a T when the Packers will make this decision. No questions about it. I am going to be on vacation from February 4th to February 9th. So you can bet that from February 4th to February 9th, the Packers will be making their defensive coordinator position. So if you're putting together a defensive coordinator pool at work and you're selecting dates, February 4th to February 9th, pretty good chance it's going to be one of those days while I'm on vacation. No doubt about it. The finesse kid, do I see a world where Barry comes back on Matt LaFleur's staff, maybe linebackers coach, or is he gone for good? I would be pretty freaking shocked for multiple reasons. The Bears are interviewing him for the defensive coordinator spot. I think it was the Eagles who are interviewing him for their linebackers coach position. As of right now, as we are talking, the Green Bay Packers do not have an open linebackers coach. I think it would also be very odd for the past defensive coordinator to stay and report to a new defensive coordinator. You also get into a little bit of a shotgun marriage there where you're telling the new defensive coordinator that he has to keep the old defensive coordinator on as a assistant linebackers coach or something like that. I also like, if you told me that Joe Barry was back, I almost would say it was like in an advisor role to like Matt LaFleur. But I think there's going to be too many other teams that are interested in him as a positional coach, which he's extremely good at. And he would be a really smart hire for any team as a linebackers coach. So my guess is that everyone just recognizes that maybe Barry likes a lot of what goes on in Green Bay, and Matt and Joe Barry have that relationship, and there's some good that could be retained there. I just don't think it makes sense at this point in time. I would ultimately be more surprised if it happened. Ian, Andy, have to compliment you on the Babbage energy comment on Twitter. Even had my wife laughing. Also love the Christian Parker interview. Yeah, I did retweet a Christian Parker article that was out there. He interviewed for the New England Patriots job recently, and there was a great article out there by a Denver Broncos writer all about Christian Parker. So I did retweet that. I would highly recommend checking it out. There's a lot of reasons, again, that I think he makes a really smart choice. For those questioning my Babbage energy, Bobby Babbage is I think he's a linebackers coach, right, for the Bills. He is a interview candidate for Green Bay. And obviously I made a very poor bad bitch energy reference on that. So yeah, I said, if you're not familiar with Bobby Babbage, I think we can all at least agree that this defense could use some Babbage energy on it. And yes, that is my very lame attempt at humor, but I will never stop. I can promise you that. From Italy. Of course, I'm going to answer if it's from Italy. How much do you think Goot is involved in the process, considering that Matt hasn't been very good with his assistant choices? I answered this, I think it was in our members only chat the other day. I don't think, Goody or Russ Ball or Mark Murphy are going to overstep in any way with Matt LaFleur. It would not surprise me if when they're going through these interviews, if Matt had Goody or some of these guys along for the ride just to get a second set of eyes and a second opinion. Now, the other thing you have to remember here too, this is draft season. We are in the thick of draft season. I don't even know if Matt said, "Hey, Brian, do you want to come and sit in my Christian Parker interview?" He might be like, "F no. Like, I've got a billion prospects to dig through. That's your job." Like, so I don't know that and Russ Ball is in the free agency season and like figuring out the salary cap for 2024. I don't know that he wants anything to do with it. The sledding hill is in peak condition right now. I don't know that Mark Murphy wants anything to do with it. I say very much in jest, but my guess is this is Matt's process, and he will, before making a final decision, go to the powers that be and say, "This is where I'm leaning." Doubt anyone would get in the way of that, but no, I think this is going to be Matt's decision through and through if I had to guess, and everyone else is just really, really freaking busy at the moment. And you don't want to overstep that stuff, especially with the way it's laid out. If you're giving everyone equal footing, let Brian do his thing with all of the roster, let Russ do all of his stuff with all of the salary cap and accounting, and let Matt do his thing with all of the coaching and coaches and everything that goes on in the day-to-day. Let them be separate. If Matt wants to go to them and pick their brain, great. But I would be surprised if anyone was overstepping their bounds in any way in that situation. Which fictional football coach from TV or the movies would you throw into the interview mix? This is very easy. What was it? What was his name? Like Terry Tate? I don't think he was actually a coach, but Terry Tate, the Office linebacker or whatever, something like that. That's very clear and obvious. Your fictional defensive coordinator for Green Bay moving forward. Type in Italian. We want evidence. Let's see. I'm make sure I didn't miss any super chats here. No, we're good. All right, let's see what this one says. Last year after the draft, Goody said that they went into targeting pass catchers and interior pass rushers. What do you think their goals should be going into this year's draft? Who or what would you target? This one is very, very easy for me because there's some very clear and obvious needs. I want to actually start on offense because I think everyone would immediately jump to defense. But I think the offensive line is so paramount. I know some are like, hey, just spend all the picks on defense or whatever. I would have no issues if 2 of those top 5 100 picks right now, even if it was the first one, were spent on the offensive line. And you might say, well, Andy, like they've got Rasheed Walker, they've got Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, Sean Ryan, and Zach Tom left to right. That is a 5-man group that can literally start for you right now and basically was your starting group for the stretch run at the end of the season. You also might have David Bakhtiari coming back. Like, why would offensive line be in your upper echelon of wants or needs going into this offseason? There's a variety of reasons. One, you have to compartmentalize Bakhtiari and just say you have no idea what's going to happen with that situation. And I think it's probably better that he doesn't, or not better, there's better odds that he doesn't play than that he does play. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope he plays. He's great, all pro. That'd be amazing. But for now, you just have to assume probably doesn't. And if you're pleasantly surprised otherwise, awesome. So I would start there. And then that leaves you with 5. And that leaves you with your depth after that right now of Luke Tenuta, Caleb Jones, and Royce Newman. And we know in the NFL, it takes one guy going down and all of a sudden a Royce Newman being in, who would probably be the next guy up right now at the moment, and your whole offensive line breaks down because of it. I also think that you want to continue to put pressure on guys like Rasheed Walker and Sean Ryan and Josh Myers. Zach Tom and Elton Jenkins are solidified. But I do think that you want to continue to pressure those and give them competition and maybe even try to find somebody better. You have good. I think you can hope and try to get great. And if you can, I think red zone offense and some of the issues on the offensive line and not being able to move people has been evident that this offensive line, not the most physical and overpowering offensive line in the world. If you can get a couple guys like that, I think you have to at least look at it. But more importantly than anything else, you found your franchise quarterback. He's it. He's him. He's the dude. He's the guy. He's the franchise, the face, all of it. You know, all you've seen, and you already are there where if you protect him, you know he's going to ball out and you know this wide receiver and tight end group of all these young, talented players are going to ball out. The only thing that you have to do for the next 7-8 years is make sure that that guy's protected and not getting hurt. And you're probably going to have a top 10 offense for the next 7-8 years because you've got all these young playmakers. You've got a top tier quarterback, potentially, if he continues on the trajectory he's at, or he might just be there already. All you have to do is protect that guy. And that's the single most important thing moving forward. So O-line is number one. We know the others: corner, safety, probably another off-ball linebacker, and then just depth, kicker. Those are the sort of things that you want to target. But for me, defensive backfield and offensive line, and then of course a long-term running back that you want to target as well. Those are probably the big three in my opinion. But offensive line, very, very important moving forward that they continue to develop that for Jordan. All right. Eugene, thanks so much for being a member for 4 years, my man. That is 4 years. That'd be amazing. 4 months. Appreciate you. Mike Well commented that Green Bay needs an alpha offensive line and an alpha safety, even though either through draft or trade. Any ideas on who they could bring in for either position, especially by trade? Trade, not necessarily, but I think free agency at safety. I think Antoine Winfield's just going to be outside of the range, and Tampa probably does everything to keep him. But watch for Xavier McKinney and Geno Stone at safety. I think those would be the big ones. I think on offensive line, you're probably looking more towards the draft. They have a base set of players. I don't think you need to go out and spend a ton of money on offensive line right now. I don't think that that is the best use of your funds because you have 5 legitimate, maybe 6 legitimate starters on your O-line right now, depending on what happens with Bakhtiari. So I don't think you need to go out and like use funds to like try to do this big time improvement. But I do think that you need to get competition, depth, and maybe some big time future starters. And that's why I would target draft for offensive line. So for me, 2 guys in the top 5 picks on offensive line, if I were Goody, and it's easy to say, like the draft has to play out a certain way. You don't just take offensive line for the sake of taking offensive line. You can't predict how the draft is going to fall. If you get there and there's no offensive lineman we're taking, don't take one just to take one. But in general, like 2 offensive linemen in the top 5, their 5 top 100 picks this year. And then I would target a safety. Again, I think Xavier McKinney or Geno Stone. And then I would take one in the draft. I would do very similarly to what they did when they did Adrian Amos, Darnell Savage, where they just went aggressively at it and said, one's not good enough. Not only are we going to go sign Adrian Amos, we're going to draft a safety in the first round too. And I think that's probably more what they should look at at the safety room is go find a guy like a Geno Stone and then go take a safety first, second round. And then, hopefully you're set after that. That's how I would kind of attack it, Eugene. Ian, thanks again. There were a position they addressed in free agency, which is most likely. Thanks again, Andy. Appreciate you so much for all you do for us. You are more than welcome, my friend. Safety is the one I just talked about. I think free agent safeties make a ton of sense. Frankie Louvu, the inside linebacker for Carolina, would be one other one that I would look at. I think his hard hitting and physical intensity paired with Quay Walker would be absolutely chef kiss perfect. So that would be one where release Devondre and maybe take a look at him as your inside linebacker. That's a free agent I would look at. And then Xavier McKinney, Geno Stone at safety. I think that is sort of the tier of shopping that you can go in. Now, McKinney's going to probably get paid a decent amount, but I think you're probably in that mid to mid high tier for a player, which again, Louvu or Geno Stone, I think fit in really, really well. Maybe a Xavier McKinney, but that's probably a couple names that I would go about attacking early in free agency. Roger, how realistic is a sophomore slump as a team for 2025? Yeah, I think it's within the realm of possibility. I don't know that it's necessarily just going to be a sophomore slump. I think expectations, a more difficult schedule this upcoming season, maybe some overconfidence from some young players that things came very easy to them in year 1. That can always lead to a little bit of a setback in year 2. I think there's possibilities there. I think it's as equally possible that you get year 2 jumps from some of these guys or continued improvement. I think Kraft and Musgrave can continue to get way better. I think guys like Dontavian Wicks, Jaden Reed are going to continue on their trajectory. I think you could get way more out of a guy like LVN. I think Carl Brooks and Colby Wooden are going to add functional strength along the defensive line and become better players because of it. I think Carrington Valentine will be much improved in his second season. So I think there's a bit of each. I think you'll maybe get some where maybe a couple guys take it for granted, but overall, I think the arrow is still very much pointing up for this team. Could it go either direction? Sure. But I tend to believe it's going to go in a positive direction. Wishful thinking or not, that's just kind of how I look at it right now. Jacob, what would your plan be for Nixon? I'd like to see him stick around, lose a few snaps on D and gain a few on O, but I fear he will be moving on. For me, there is not, and I don't mean to be harsh or crass on this, there's not a single free agent that Green Bay has that is a priority for me. Not a single one. Not AJ Dillon, not Keyshawn Nixon, not John Runyon Jr., not Yosh Nijman, especially not Yosh Nijman. There's zero priorities. Not Darnell Savage, not Rudy Ford, not Jonathan Owens. There's nobody. There's not a single unrestricted free agent that I have any concern. If they lost any of them tomorrow, I would not bat an eye over it. I wish all of them insane success. I hope they all go on to amazing careers. If that's in Green Bay, awesome. That's not a hit towards any of them. It's just none of them to me are high-priced priorities in any way. I would keep in touch with multiple guys, John Runyon Jr., Keyshawn Nixon, AJ Dillon, probably on the top of that list that I would keep in touch with. And Rudy Ford may be another one where, hey, if the price is right and things are cheap enough, I'm willing to keep you around, but I'm not going to go out of my way. And if somebody else is willing to offer you more money, that's totally cool. We have, Green Bay has a core group of players on this team that is set to go for the foreseeable future, and they're going to add 10 or 11 more draft picks to it, maybe a free agent signing or two, probably a few undrafted free agents that get in the mix for making the team, maybe guys like a Grant Dubose or a Keyshawn Banks or somebody that's ready to take a step from the practice squad onto the active roster, Jonathan Ford. I think this team is pretty much set from a talent standpoint, and not necessarily from like a high-end talent that they can't get more, but like their base is set. Their foundation is set. I don't think any of those guys moves the needle. Keyshawn Nixon as a returner, yes, but like kick returns are becoming far less popular, and everyone just kind of wants to take it at the 25. Punt return, he's more of an adventure at, and you have Jaden Reed to do that anyway. I don't really have a preference as a punt returner. And as a corner, I think he's like your Jarrett Bush. I think you kind of want him as a break glass in case of emergency guy, not your starting nickel. I would also say, I also like the idea of him as a gadget player. You were using him, if you're using him as a gadget player on like end arounds and reverses, and you have 7 wide receivers already that you need to find a way to get on the field. Like adding snaps to Keyshawn Nixon there just probably doesn't make sense. So to me, the value has gone down because kick returns are less popular. I don't think there's really a role for him on offense, and he's not a starter on defense. If you can get him back as your 5th or 6th corner, by all means, and it's a good price, awesome. That'd be great. Can he be a core special teams guy? Yeah. Can he be your kick returner? Yeah. Could he be a gadget guy if you wanted to on offense? Yeah. Could he be your 5th or 6th corner? Yeah. Do you have good value there? Awesome. But there's not a single free agent on the list that I have any concern over losing whatsoever. Jonathan, is H-back fullback a vital piece of Matt's offense, or do you think they simply prioritize the type of inline guys that they have? Not a priority at all. I mean, DeGuara played like 8 snaps a game towards the like last half of the season. Would they like to have somebody who could like play those 8 snaps? I'm sure they would, but like I have zero doubt in my mind that if they want to cross train Tucker Kraft or Ben Sims this offseason to run and do what just like, it would be one thing if like it was Juszczyk and like Juszczyk, like you really needed those snaps. DeGuara wasn't even good at the 8 snaps that he was in for. So if you want to use Ben Sims or Tucker Kraft to do exactly what Josiah DeGuara did, and not very well, you could easily do that. I don't think it's vital. I don't think it's important. And you've got a Henry Pearson as a fullback on the roster already. If you did want to go in that direction, who did get a few snaps this season, I don't think it's a priority in any way, Jonathan. Another Ian, have you started looking into this year's draft yet? And if so, who would you like the Packers to take at 25? So I kind of talked through this a couple of times this week already, but this week is my final week of like recapping and everything that happened in 2023. Next week is probably going to be a lot of defensive coordinator stuff. But starting next week is all off season, defensive coordinator, free agents, draft. So I will dig extremely deep into all of the draft stuff. This is my first off season where I'm not having my full-time job on the side. My days open up tremendously. The amount of radio hits that I do go down, the amount of interviews that I do for the podcast go down significantly. So like my days open up insane. So I cannot wait to dig into the draft and free agency and coach defensive coordinators and things like that. But that will start expeditious or fast on Monday and will be very aggressive starting on Monday. So looking forward to it, but I do not have somebody in mind yet at 25 yet, Ian. Here's the other thing, just really quick on draft stuff, because I know like everyone immediately the season ends and they dig into the draft. For me, I try to avoid everything until I watch the players myself. I feel like what can happen so easily with draft stuff is everyone just gets groupthink and everyone's like, oh, this player's 25 on Daniel Jeremiah's list and on Mel Kiper's list and on everyone's list. He's 25th or any like, so everyone's like, he must be like the 25th best player. He must be really good. And everyone has this and this to say about him. Like, I really like forming my own opinions on everyone. So like, obviously I know Caleb Williams, Drake May, I know Marvin Harrison Jr., Odunze. Like, I know so many of these guys just from, osmosis of like, seeing some of the stuff from the side, but I really want to go in to every single prospect with a blank slate and make my own opinion so that I can give you guys my honest assessment of it and my scouting report. That's not just going to be me going to, Daniel Jeremiah's notes and just cliff noting what he has to say. Like, I really want to form my own opinions on it. So it takes longer. And it, like, part of it sucks because I don't feel like I have a fully formulated opinion until about right before the draft. And everyone wants like hot takes right now. Who's going to be the guy at 25? And I have no freaking clue because I want to go into each of these guys with a fresh set of eyes. So I'll get there. I promise. I can't wait to dig into it, but it's not quite there yet. Well, an untainted draft question. How do you feel about drafting a linebacker? Yeah, they should absolutely grab one. You figure Eric Wilson's a free agent. I think Devondre Campbell gets released. That's not set in stone, but I think he does. And then basically, like, you have Christian Welch as a special teams guy. You've got McDuffie, where I think you would ideally keep him as like your number 3 linebacker. And then you've got Quay Walker. Whether it's free agency or the draft, I think you at least need to get some competition there. And you would ideally like, I think, a little bit more of a thumper on some early downs. So whether it's free agency or draft, you need to attack it. And they should easily be looking for linebackers in the draft as well. Iowa Joe, you can email me, packadaypodcast@gmail.com, or you can DM me on Twitter as well. Those are probably the best 2 ways. What are your reports on Spoon, or what are your thoughts on Spoon's report that the Packers are sending Stokes and Watson to UW-Madison for research? Definitely an interesting report. I have not read that yet. I'm very excited for that, though. That's very interesting. I just love the fact that Matt LaFleur, you can tell, is not leaving anything up to chance. Like, say what you will. I love Matt LaFleur. I do. I think he's a phenomenal head coach, and he will do anything to make this team better. He immediately moved on from Joe Barry. He immediately, and I know that some people obviously wanted it a lot sooner or just never in the first place at all. I get that, but he's moved on from Joe Barry. He's looking into the injury issue. He's, let go of the strength and conditioning coach. They brought in a new kicker already. Like, this team is not letting anything to chance. They are going to do everything they're in their power to make every incremental improvement that they can. So I'm excited to read that, but really excited that they're taking it so seriously. Timmy, I got a lot of respect for you, Andy. Keep up the great videos. Looking forward to the draft. Go Pack Go. Guys, oh, by the way, spoiler. For those of you who are looking for draft content, I can't believe I didn't bring this up already. I'm just going to announce it right here. Starting on this Monday, there will be a daily draft episode content called The Daily Draft here on the Pack-A-Day Podcast, YouTube and audio channels, featuring Ross Uglum every single day. Mondays are going to be dedicated to Mock Draft Monday more often than not. And then every single day is going to be about a 10 to 15 minute prospect breakdown or overall draft conversation, or like I said, a Mock Draft Monday through Friday. He will not be doing weekends, but Monday through Friday from now, probably until after the draft, as we recap everything, a new daily episode every single day called The Daily Draft featuring Ross Uglum. I will be making appearances on that. I think Jacob Morley is going to be making some appearances on that as well. I'm sure Ross will have some other guests on, but for those of you who are dying to get more draft content and can't get enough of it, not only will we have the daily Pack-A-Day Podcast video, now will we only have our regular daily Pack-A-Day Podcast audio video on top of that. We will also have Ross with a daily draft video every single weekday between now and the NFL draft, with some special guests on that as well. That is starting this coming Monday, January 29th. So look out for that. Should be absolutely amazing. All right. Do you think that the lack of decent looking outgoing free agents and thus comp pick possibilities make it more likely that Green Bay will be more aggressive with the money they do have? John, that is an awesome observation. And quite frankly, I hadn't thought of it, but it's very, very smart. I do think that this is probably one of those years where they probably don't get much of a comp pick in return for any of the guys that they let go. You're probably looking at maybe some 7th round picks for guys like Runyon or Nixon or Dillon if they, get signed to decent deals and if they do leave elsewhere, but you're not really losing much. So this might be a year where if you are going to go get like a guy and you're going to spend big, maybe now's the year to do it. It's a really interesting thought process. They're going to have to open up some money to do that, but you can make an argument. John, this is a really genius thought, my friend. I had not put thought to that, but I really like the way that you're thinking, where as like in a future year, you could have like, players that you have leaving free agency. I don't know that Green Bay is going to be in that position in the future, like in the near future, because I think they're going to just want to keep most of their guys. So it may be a little bit much ado about nothing because maybe they're not in this situation for a while, but it is a really astute point, and I'll have to think on that a little bit. But I like where your head's at, John. Good observation. All right. Killer Quinn Caldwell. What are the potential benefits of bringing in a first-time defensive coordinator like Al Harris? Well, there's a lot of upside. There's going to be advantages and disadvantages to everything. The first thing I will say is you're going to get new thoughts, new ideas, and not something that's just been done around the league already. Now, everything's a copycat league, so Al Harris would inherently probably copy a lot of stuff from Dan Quinn. Christian Parker's, I'm sure, going to copy a lot of stuff from other, the coaches that he's been with, Mike Pettin and Vance Joseph, but you get to put together your own path. And I think that's something that's important to a new young coordinator. And I just think like, if you're hiring a retread or somebody that's been in a defensive coordinator position in the past, there's a reason that they're no longer in a job to some extent. Maybe it was attitude. Maybe they didn't get along with the head coach. Maybe their defense failed at previous jobs. It's hard to take somebody that has done a job somewhere else and done it okay or bad and bring them into the next one and all of a sudden they're great. I think that's a hard sell sometimes. If look at Mike Macdonald. Mike Macdonald, if you look at his resume, and he's like the best defensive mind going in the NFL right now, this is his resume as a defensive coordinator. Before he was defensive coordinator, I should say. What if I told you that this was the path for Green Bay's next defensive coordinator? In 2008, 2009, he was a linebackers coach and running backs coach at Cedar Shoals High School in Georgia. In 2010, he was a graduate assistant at the University of Georgia. And then for 3 years, he was a defensive quality control assistant at Georgia. In 2014, he was a coaching intern for the Ravens. 2015 and 16, he was a defensive assistant. In 2017, he was their defensive backs coach. 2018 through 2020, he was the Ravens linebackers coach. He spent 1 year at Michigan as their defensive coordinator in 2021, and then became the Ravens defensive coordinator in 2022. He had 1 year as a college defensive coordinator in any sort of coordinator role prior to going back to Baltimore to become their defensive coordinator. We can do that with some other, certainly great defensive coordinator names as well. I mean, look at DeMeco Ryans before he really became popular, right? That's probably another interesting one to look at. He, before becoming, this was his coaching career. 2017 defensive quality control coach for the 49ers, 2018 to 2020 inside linebackers coach, and then in 2021 became the 49ers defensive coordinator. In 2023 became the Texans head coach. Just because necessarily that somebody's been experienced doesn't necessarily make them better. You need to find the next Steve Spagnuolo. You need to find the next Mike Macdonald. You need to find the next guy that's going to tear up the NFL with their defensive schemes. I think bringing in somebody that has the ability to forge their own path and do that is exciting because maybe they are the next great thing, the next amazing defensive mind. It could go the other direction as well, but it could be that way. Look at Steve Wilkes that's in the 49ers defensive coordinator position now. Look at him. He's an older coach, has bounced around some head coaching stints, some defensive coordinator stints, all this stuff, but he's great. He's done an amazing job in San Francisco. It's really hard to tell. Like I said, there's no perfect calculus for who's going to be good, who's going to be bad, what's going to be the next great mind. But that's why you hire the coach, you get them in the interview room, and you vet everything out as to whether or not they would be a really good coordinator. And then you sort of kind of hope and pray for the best. Tom, thank you so much for becoming a new member. Really appreciate that. Dylan, remember all the talk about the star position and Barry scheme, what happened with all that? Just a case of disparity between expectations and reality. It was just blown out of proportion. Every single team in the NFL, it's like a star is just like your nickel corner in the slot. Like every team has it. Every team's playing nickel 90% of the time. And everyone has somebody in their nickel spot. And there's like a few in the history of time, like Jalen Ramsey or Charles Woodson, that can play it at such an elite level that it completely changes that everything that you do on defense. So like, yeah, you would love for a team to be able to have that, but every team's looking for a star, if you will. Everyone else is just playing a nickel corner and they're trying to get by with what they have. Let's put it that way. But I don't think there was anything that was really extra extravagant about it. It was just, I don't know, a different way of calling a specific position. And I think it kind of got blown out of proportion a little bit. Let's talk about Evero. Evero is the guy, except he probably in all cases will not be the guy. Ejiro Evero is under contract with the Carolina Panthers as their defensive coordinator. Carolina just hired the offensive coordinator from Tampa Bay to become their head coach. All initial reports are that they want to keep their defensive staff intact as much as possible. Could there be a situation where Evero and the new head coach just don't click and they ultimately let Evero just go and out of his contract? It's possible, but it's probably extremely unlikely at this point. There are people that I've seen say, well, yeah, but if given the choice between staying with a new coach that he doesn't know in Carolina or going to Green Bay and going with Matt LaFleur, of course he'd rather go with Green Bay and Matt LaFleur. That's not his choice. He's under contract in Carolina. Green Bay can request an interview and Carolina will adamantly say no, unless there's some sort of falling out. So every expectation right now is that he is going to stay the defensive coordinator in Carolina unless A, he gets a head coaching job in one of the two remaining head coaching jobs, which isn't looking likely, or B, the Carolina Panthers let him out of his contract and they decide to go in a different directions. But as of right now, it does not seem like that's going to be the case. So in all likelihood, Evero is not going to be the guy. Jay Western, you could not be more right. Charles Woodson was the perfect star. He was a star, a Hall of Fame star, a star of all stars. He was unbelievable. Is there any truth to the rumor that I am making up that the Packers are waiting on Clement's decision about staying before cutting ties with Barry as a potential replacement? All right, guy, you are, there's no truth to the rumor that you are making up. No, you don't want Tom Clements doing anything besides coaching Jordan Love anyway. Don't want anything, any change in that. There is a comp pick total. I think you might be right at 32. I'd have to look that up, but there is a total number of comp picks that they're limited to every single year. All right. What else do you guys want to talk about? Just looking through some of the questions here. Sorry for the silence. Yes, Ben, I will finally get my new setup together. Hopefully sooner rather than later. All right, Techwin. With how many young guys we already have on the roster, do you think it's fair to expect that some of the later picks get traded away? Picks are less valuable if we can't keep them all. I do think there's a good chance that Goody uses some of his draft capital to move up in the draft and maybe end up with like 8 or 9 players rather than 11 or 10 or like 11, 12, something like that. So yeah, I think it's possible. I also know Goody loves his draft picks. And I also know that like he seems more willing, especially now. And especially with a lot of those picks going to be 6th or 7th rounders to like, hey, if they don't make the team, we're just going to release them. You know, we saw Jonathan Ford, previous 7th round pick get released. We saw Grant Dubose get released. We saw Lou Nichols get released. So if they don't make it, they just don't make it. And I think some of those late picks, you can have a little bit more of that mentality towards. But yeah, I think if he feels like, hey, we really don't need to add 13, 14 guys to this roster, then yeah, I think it's more, I would say it's more likely that he uses picks to move up than it is that he moves down and gets more picks. I'll say it that way. But if you said he ended up with 11 still, that probably feels about right. US Sports Cards, it's out there. If you just Google it, the expected salary cap for 2024 is out there already. So you can just, you can look it up really quick. Yeah, late picks are lottery tickets. I mean, here's the other thing about Goody though, too, right? Bo Melton was a 7th round pick that he stole off of the Seahawks practice squad. Luke Tenuta was a 6th round pick that he claimed off of waivers to keep him around. I feel like there's one other one that I'm missing too, but he's got like 2 or 3, late round draft picks that he's just flat out stolen from other teams and was able to get them under the Green Bay banner. So just because he doesn't select them doesn't mean he can't find ways to get them later on as well. All right, since it's happy hour, I'm going to probably get out of here pretty quick. Guys, this is the fastest, I think, a 55-minute happy hour has ever gone by. I looked up, I was expecting us to be at like 30 minutes so far, and we've been going 55 minutes. So thank you. Thanks for being here, but I'm going to get out of here. Pineapple on pizza, yay or nay? This is my, I've answered this before, but it's very consistent. Pineapple on pizza is fine. It is fine. It's not good. It's not great. It's not bad. It's not awful. It's fine. If I had a couple beers and there's a pizza over there and it's a Hawaiian pizza or it's a cheese and pineapple pizza, am I going to eat said pizza? You bet your ass I'm going to eat said pizza. That being said, if you get on the phone, prop comedy, if you get on the phone and you go to your pizza, your favorite pizza place, and your top thing to order, like any of your like 5 top orders are anything with pineapple on it, you're just doing it wrong. There's like 30 better pizzas than a pineapple pizza. So I'm not judging. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying that it's not edible. It goes fine. And in the right situation, it can hit the right way. But in no way, shape, or form should it be in like your top 20 pizzas that you would ever order on any given day. So that's my take on pineapple on pizza. Jay Western, really quick. This is a very nuanced conversation with Bakhtiari. I do think he does everything in his power to play. Whether or not it's successful and whether or not that's with Green Bay remains to be seen. But I don't think Bakhtiari has any thoughts of calling it quits as of this point. John prefers Lunchable pizza. Pineapple pizza is Yash Nyman. Smith South, very well said. You could get by with pineapple pizza in an emergency situation, or like, you know, if you really don't want to look all that closely at what you're doing, like, yeah, you could, it's fine, but you would prefer a Zach Tom of pizzas or a David Bakhtiari in his prime of pizzas. Pineapple is the David Bakhtiari the Yash Nyman of pizzas. It's Josiah DeGuara of toppings. There we go. All right. Any other, we'll do one more, one more serious question, and then we'll get out of here. All right. I guess that's a great place to end. I've talked a little bit about the overall situation in general. What are your thoughts on Parker, Babbage, Durden? Any of them more exciting or promising than the others? As I've mentioned, Christian Parker is sort of my guy. I want to do deep dives into all of them, to be honest, before I get a really strong take on any of the three, although I have looked into Christian Parker already, obviously. But I want to look at the other three, and we'll be doing deep dives into defensive coordinators coming up, guys. So that's going to happen. As of right now, Christian Parker is the guy that they've interviewed that's on the top of my list. I don't think any of them are bad candidates. The Cowboys guy is really interesting to me. I want to definitely do some more research into him. Babbage is a name I've been tracking for a while, and definitely somebody with a really interesting pedigree. Obviously, he's got experience. His dad was a coach and those sort of things. But coming from the Sean McDermott tree, I think is very enticing. I think all of them are worthwhile interviews. How you want to rank them is probably up to personal preference, and that's something that I'll dig into more. But as of right now, of the ones that have been confirmed interviews, Christian Parker is on the top of my list. All right. A lot of pizza conversations, guys. I'm going to head out. Thank you so much for being here. Carmen Vitale episode launches tomorrow for Pack-A-Day podcast members. It is already up. So what better reason to become a Pack-A-Day podcast member than right now you can get a Carmen Vitale episode. I also did a bonus episode for members only. I recorded it prior to this that I'm going to upload as soon as we are done here. So I'm going to get working on that. Sunday, we're going to talk certainly more about defensive coordinators. Tomorrow with Carmen, we talk a little bit about Mike Caldwell as a possibility as well. Next live chat will be Wednesday for Pack-A-Day Live. Lauren Helmbrecht from WFRV here in Green Bay, I know, is going to be joining me for that one. Ross Uglum starts Monday morning on the daily draft, so make sure to start checking that out. If you're not subscribed, hit subscribe, hit that like button below so that those who weren't able to make it live it'll show up in their algorithm. But you guys are the best. Appreciate you a ton. Can't thank you enough all season long. The off season is going to be so freaking exciting. So make sure you're checking out the podcast 365 days a year. We are just getting started on what is going to be an incredible journey for this Packers team. The story is just starting. The story is just starting for this new era of Packers football, and what they do in free agency, the draft, defensive coordinator is all going to matter a ton. So again, make sure you're checking out the podcast 365 days a year. See you guys tomorrow. Talk to you soon. As always, go Pack Go.